I've been in youth ministry 20 years now, and one thing that I've had a lot during that time is people asking me how they can start some kind of a youth group, some kind of a youth ministry in their parish. The answer that I always give is that it's harder than people think. If you want to create what I would call a pizza and table tennis group, which just gives young people something to do, actually it's fairly easy. If you want to create something a little bit deeper than that, that's actually going to stand a chance of keeping people in the church, it's a little bit harder. You need to put in the work. It can be done. It takes time, but it can be done. What I'm going to give you today is 13 tips for moving in that direction. And by the way, before I start, if you want to learn this stuff properly, we have something called the Engage course. The Engage course is a 10-week online course, 10 sessions, 1 hour each. We cover huge amounts of aspects of how to deliver good youth ministry, and the course is led by some of the biggest names in youth ministry in the UK. Go to castlerigmanor.co.uk/engage, this address right here, in fact, to find out more. Tip number 1, as I've just said, is don't rush in. If you want to start a youth group and your plan is to start it next week with the 2 people that have had a brief conversation, it's probably not going to go anywhere. Youth groups take time to set up, they take time to market, and they take time to see results. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. Don't rush in before you've thought about it and made some plans. Tip number 2, the first thing to do is to build a team. Ideally, you want a core team of probably about 3 people, maybe 2, maybe 4. They're the people who really take responsibility for it, take ownership of it. Then, as well as those people, you probably want another 3 or 4 volunteers. They don't have the same level of ownership of the event, they don't have to be there every time. Maybe they'll come 3 times out of 4, and they can rotate around a little bit as well. But you need to form that team before you start. Once you've formed that team, get together, get to know each other. Get together to plan, get together to pray, and importantly, get together to socialise. Teams that know each other, teams that like each other, teams that are good friends behind the scenes, they're the teams that deliver the best ministry. Tip number 3, decide who the group is for. Personally, I think if you're starting with a brand new ministry in a parish, the best age group to start with is 11 to 13 year olds. What in England we would call year 7 to 9, what in America they'd call junior high, I think. Whatever you do though, you need to pick an age group. You may have in your parish a certain group of young people at a certain age who have a certain need to start a group now, but generally I think that younger age group is the best. But whatever you do, pick an age group. The age group needs to be fairly tight. The youngest person in your group, in my view, shouldn't be more than 3 years younger than the oldest person in the group. Otherwise the group gets a little bit weird. If you've got the resources to start a huge group with lots and lots of different streams, then fair enough, but otherwise keep the age group tight. Be warned as well, you will get some mums coming up to you asking if you can let their son or daughter in who's only 6 months younger. Always say no, it's the thin end of the wedge, okay? That will never stop going outwards and outwards and outwards. Decide who it's for, keep that age bracket tight. Tip number 4, market your group. Personally, I think the right amount of time to give to marketing a youth group is about 2 months. Any more than that and things start to get lost. Any less than that, you're not really reaching everybody. You need to market, and you need to market very, very hard. Talk to young people at Mass. I mean, go in pairs, obviously, don't make it weird, but talk to young people at Mass. Get the clergy to talk to young people at Mass. Talk to families, mums, grannies especially, they're brilliant. Talk to local schools. Hit up social media. Get parents involved, just basically do everything you can. Parish newsletters, posters, flyers, the whole work. That 2 months you need to market it, and then you need to keep pushing it. And that young person at the start of that 2 months who said they were interested, don't forget about them. Keep talking to them through that 2 months. Tip number 5, figure out your programme. Personally, I think the right amount of time for a youth group is 90 minutes. And personally, I think when you're starting off, you should meet about every 2 weeks or so. That 90 minutes is important. No more than 50% of that 90 minutes should be input. What I would do, for instance, with a 90-minute slot is at the start, I would have probably 45 minutes of food, games, icebreakers, getting to know each other, mixing and mingling, doing announcements, sorting out those consent forms, that kind of thing. Then I'd have about 35-40 minutes of input. Then you've got a little bit of time at the end for prayer, announcements, stuff to close it off. If you're really experienced, you can probably write your own program. But if you're starting out, I'd seriously recommend you take one of the products that's already been written. Look at something like Youth Alpha, look at Chosen, look at Life Team. There's lots of products out there. You can ditch them at a certain point once you find your feet and get confident, but starting with one of those products can at least show you what good youth ministry should look like when you're just trying to find your feet. Tip number 6, make sure you get the safeguarding right. A lot of people get put off working with young people because they think they're going to get into trouble if they do something wrong. That's actually very, very unlikely, but there are certain things you do need to get right. The place to check is with your diocese. They will tell you what the rules are in your area. But you will need to think about consent forms and generally how you're communicating with parents. You'll need to think about background checks. Your safeguarding office might want you to do a quick course just to go through the basics, and you'll also need to think about things like how you're storing information, how you're storing those consent forms, and how you're communicating with young people between sessions. Tip number 7, evangelisation is a marathon, not a sprint. Okay, we've already used that analogy once, but it works for this as well. Young people do not go from being fairly lapsed to being absolutely on fire disciples with their hands in the air in 2 youth group sessions. Okay, it takes months, if not years, and you have to journey with them through that process. What does it is those relationships. But one mistake people make is that as soon as a young person shows a little bit of interest, they kind of blurt. What do I mean by blurt? I mean that young person gets sat down and that young person gets told everything about everything because they've showed that slight little sliver of interest. Don't do that, okay? Drip feed information in, drip feed in a bit of testimony, keep those relationships strong and they will keep coming back. Look for those natural opportunities to evangelise them and take them that step further in their faith. If you're doing it right, those opportunities will be there. Tip number 8, this one's particularly close to my heart. Everybody likes food. It's a universal fact that if you put food at the start of an event, people will turn up and people will enjoy it more. I always start off youth group evenings with food. For one thing, it helps people to bond. If people have got pizza, Coca-Cola, that kind of thing, they've got something to do, it makes mixing and mingling a little bit less worrying for people that maybe aren't so confident. But also, trust me on this, parents will love you. If you're feeding their kids, that's one less thing they have to worry about that evening. Tip number 9, we've kind of said this already, but it should be said again and again and again and again. Youth ministry is all about relationships. The thing that evangelises them is the leaders being serious, on-fire disciples who love them. So they need to see both aspects of that. They need to see that you're serious about your faith, and they need to see how much you love them and care about them. So mix with them. Mix, mix, mix. One thing I hate seeing in youth groups is a church hall and all of the young people on that side, all of the leaders are on the other side. Whenever I see that, I always grab the leaders and say, no, go and mingle with them, go and talk to them. Leaders need to show an interest. It's a little bit scary, I know. One little tip, hunt in packs, go up to them in pairs. It's a little bit easier, but show them that you care about them away from just the input. Tip number 10, don't sweat the numbers. Yes, if you've only ever got half a person turning up to your youth group, that's a little bit of a worry, especially because, half a person, that's not great, is it? But you know what I mean, okay? Don't sweat the numbers. Unless your numbers are ridiculously low, don't worry too much. Numbers will go up and down. One thing that tends to be true with youth groups is that when youth groups launch, you get a lot of people. Over the next few sessions, that number dwindles, and then you get what I'd call your core. And when you've got your core, that first group of young people who are committed and interested, that's when real growth starts happening. But don't worry about young people leaving. There will come natural graduation points where this group of young people move on to something else and the next group of young people come in. That's going to happen. Don't resent it. But don't think too much about numbers. If you've got a quality product and if you keep marketing as you go along, which you have to do, the group will come good. Tip number 11, evaluate as you go. Keep asking yourself if it's working. Keep talking to the young people. Keep talking to the parents. If a young person unexpectedly leaves your group, have a conversation with them. Just say to them, look, we're not blaming you for leaving. It's absolutely fine. We still love you. But can we ask you why you left so we can make it better for other people? Tip number 12, always be on the lookout for the next leader. Keep looking around the parish. Think about catechists, think about people in other groups, think about parents, think about young people that graduated from the youth group a few years ago. Keep thinking about who might make the next leader. Socialise with them, bring them in to the social group you've hopefully formed with the leaders. Talk to them at Mass. Tip number 13 is to protect your group. That sounds a bit strange, but one thing I find again and again is that when you build up a group that's good, other people will swoop in on your young people and they'll swoop in on your leaders and try and get them to do everything in the parish. As a leader of a successful group, you have to kind of be a little bit fighty and you have to say no. Otherwise the group can dissolve fairly quickly. So those are our 13 tips for running a youth group. You can find lots of other stuff online. There's lots of good resources out there. As I said, I'd particularly recommend our Engage course. It runs online every March and every September. Right now we've got an early bird discount up until February the 10th if you want to start with us here at Castle Rig. Well, it's not at Castle Rig, that's the point, but it's coming up in March. Thank you and God bless.